The crack of rifle fire echoed across the frozen valley of Mount Blackstone at 0547 hours. Corporal Sarah Mackenzie pressed her eye to the scope, her breath forming small clouds in the bitter December air. Through the crosshairs, she watched the enemy sniper fall from his concealed position in the abandoned radio tower 300 yards away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Target neutralized," she whispered into her radio, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Copy that, Ghost 7. Nice shot," came the reply from Lieutenant Colonel James Hartford, positioned in the command bunker 2 miles behind the front lines. "That makes 17 confirmed kills this week, Mackenzie." Sarah adjusted her position behind the fallen log that had served as her hiding spot for the past 4 hours. Snow had accumulated on her ghillie suit, providing perfect camouflage against the white landscape of the Colorado Rockies. What had started as a routine training exercise at Fort Davidson had turned into something far more serious when intelligence reports confirmed enemy infiltration teams had penetrated deep into American territory. The year was 1962, and tensions between the United States and the Eastern Coalition had reached a breaking point. What the newspapers called border skirmishes were actually full-scale battles fought in the remote mountain passes of Colorado, far from civilian populations. The government couldn't risk panic by admitting foreign forces had established strongholds on American soil. Sarah Mackenzie had earned her nickname One-Shot Wonder during basic training at Fort Benning. While other recruits needed multiple attempts to hit their targets, Sarah never missed. Her drill sergeants initially thought it was luck, but after weeks of consistent perfect scores, they realized they had something special. Born and raised in the hunting grounds of rural Montana, Sarah had been shooting since she could hold a rifle. Her father, a World War II veteran named Thomas Mackenzie, had taught her that ammunition was precious and every shot had to count. Now, at 23 years old, she found herself part of an elite unit called the Mountain Hawks, tasked with defending the most treacherous terrain in North America. The unit consisted of only 12 soldiers, each hand-picked for their specialized skills in alpine warfare, marksmanship, and survival. "Mackenzie, we've got movement in Sector 7, Hartford's voice crackled through her earpiece. Reconnaissance reports estimate 15 to 20 hostiles establishing sniper nests along Granite Ridge. They're trying to control the high ground before our supply convoy arrives at 1200 hours. Sarah studied the terrain through her binoculars. Granite Ridge was a jagged line of rocky outcroppings that provided natural cover for snipers. The enemy had chosen their position well. From those heights, they could pick off anyone attempting to use the mountain pass below. The supply convoy, carrying medical supplies and ammunition for the forward operating bases, couldn't take an alternate route. The other passes were either blocked by avalanches or controlled by enemy forces. Sarah Mackenzie had earned her nickname One-Shot Wonder during basic training at Fort Benning. While other recruits needed multiple attempts to hit their targets, Sarah never missed. Her drill sergeants initially thought it was luck, but after weeks of consistent perfect scores, they realized they had something special. Born and raised in the hunting grounds of rural Montana, Sarah had been shooting since she could hold a rifle. Her father, a World War II veteran named Thomas Mackenzie, had taught her that ammunition was precious and every shot had to count. Now, at 23 years old, she found herself part of an elite unit called the Mountain Hawks, tasked with defending the most treacherous terrain in North America. The unit consisted of only 12 soldiers, each hand-picked for their specialized skills in alpine warfare, marksmanship, and survival. "Mackenzie, we've got movement in Sector 7. Hartford's voice crackled through her earpiece. Reconnaissance reports estimate 15 to 20 hostiles establishing sniper nests along Granite Ridge. They're trying to control the high ground before our supply convoy arrives at 1200 hours. Sarah studied the terrain through her binoculars. Granite Ridge was a jagged line of rocky outcroppings that provided natural cover for snipers. The enemy had chosen their position well. From those heights, they could pick off anyone attempting to use the mountain pass below. The supply convoy, carrying medical supplies and ammunition for the forward operating bases, couldn't take an alternate route. The other passes were either blocked by avalanches or controlled by enemy forces. "What's the timeline for engagement?" Sarah asked, already calculating wind speed and distance in her head. "The convoy departs in 4 hours. We need those positions cleared before they reach the killing zone," Hartford replied. "But there's a complication. We've lost contact with Alpha Team. They were supposed to flank from the north 2 hours ago." Alpha Team consisted of 5 soldiers, led by Sergeant Marcus Thompson, a tough-as-nails soldier from Texas who had served 3 tours in Korea. Sarah had trained alongside Thompson and knew he was too experienced to simply disappear without sending a status report. "Could be radio malfunction," suggested Captain Rebecca Walsh, the team's communications specialist, joining the conversation from her position in the mobile command unit. "Negative," Hartford's voice carried a note of concern. "We received their last transmission at 0330. Thompson reported they were in position and beginning their advance. Then, nothing." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Alpha Team's silence could mean they had been captured, eliminated, or worse, turned. Intelligence briefings had warned about enemy psychological operations designed to convert captured American soldiers. "What about Bravo Team?" Sarah asked, referring to the unit positioned on the eastern slope. "Bravo Team is pinned down by machine gun fire near Eagle's Nest," Hartford explained. Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams reported 3 wounded, including their medic. "They're combat ineffective for this mission." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Of the 3 teams assigned to secure Granite Ridge, only Sarah's Charlie Team remained operational. But Charlie Team was down to 6 soldiers after yesterday's engagement, where they had lost Private David Chen to an enemy sniper and Corporal Michael Rodriguez to a landmine explosion. "Ma'am, we've got company," whispered Private First Class Amanda Foster, Sarah's spotter, who had been monitoring the valley below through high-powered binoculars. Foster, a former competitive shooter from Ohio, had joined the military after her younger brother was killed in a border incident the previous year. Foster, a 19, was the youngest member of Charlie Team, but her sharp eyes and mathematical precision made her invaluable as Sarah's spotter. Sarah shifted her scope towards Foster's indicated direction. Through the magnified lens, she could see figures moving between the trees, approximately 800 yards away. They wore white winter camouflage and moved with the practiced efficiency of veteran soldiers. What made Sarah's blood run cold was the realization that they were using American equipment and following American tactical formations. "Are those our people?" Foster asked quietly. Sarah watched as one of the figures turned towards their position. Even at this distance, she could see the distinctive markings on his helmet. It was Sergeant Thompson's unit identifier, but something was wrong. The soldier's movements were too rigid, too mechanical, as if he were following orders against his will. "Hartford, we have visuals on Alpha Team," Sarah reported, "but they're not moving under their own command. Repeat, Alpha Team appears to be compromised." The silence that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds, Sarah counted them. When Hartford's voice returned, it carried the weight of a man who had just received confirmation of his worst fears. "Copy that, Ghost 7. Alpha Team is to be considered hostile. Rules of engagement are now weapons-free for all targets in Sector 7. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, understanding the full implications of the order. She would have to shoot soldiers she had trained with, eaten meals with, and considered friends. But she also understood that whatever had happened to Alpha Team, they were no longer operating under American command. "How many are moving with the compromised unit?" Hartford asked. Foster continued her observation through the binoculars. "I count 8 figures. 5 match Alpha Team's equipment signatures. 3 unknowns with non-standard gear. That means we've lost Thompson, Corporals Jake Sullivan and Maria Santos, Private Eddie Turner, and Specialist Kevin O'Brien," Sarah said quietly. The tactical situation was now beyond critical. 15 to 20 enemy snipers controlled the high ground. A compromised American unit was moving to reinforce them. Sarah's reduced Charlie Team would have to engage superior numbers while distinguishing between true enemies and their own people operating under hostile control. "Ghost 7, what's your assessment?" Hartford's question carried the weight of the entire operation. Sarah studied the terrain one more time, calculating angles, distances, and firing positions. The enemy snipers on Granite Ridge had clear lines of sight to the convoy route. The compromised Alpha Team knew all of Charlie Team's standard operating procedures and communication protocols. The clock was ticking toward the convoy's departure time. "Sir, we're going to need a miracle," Sarah replied. settling deeper into her firing position and beginning her mental preparation for what would either be the greatest victory of her military career or her final mission. The war for America's mountain frontier was about to begin, and Corporal Sarah Mackenzie was about to discover whether her reputation as the one-shot wonder would hold true when every shot could determine the fate of her country. Private First Class Amanda Foster adjusted her binoculars, tracking the movement of the compromised Alpha team through the tree line. Her hands remained steady despite the gravity of the situation, a skill she'd developed during countless hours at shooting competitions across Ohio. At 19, she was the youngest member of Charlie Team, but her sharp eyes and mathematical precision made her invaluable as Sarah's spotter. "Distance to the lead figure is 847 yards, Foster whispered, her breath barely visible in the cold air. Foster's motivation for joining the Mountain Hawks ran deeper than patriotism. 18 months ago, her younger brother Danny had been killed during what the government publicly called a training accident near the Canadian border. Only Foster knew the truth. Danny had been part of a classified reconnaissance mission when enemy forces had ambushed his unit. The official story kept the public calm, but it left Foster burning for revenge. 200 yards to their left, Corporal Lisa Zhang crouched behind a boulder, her medical kit spread beside her as she tended to Private Timothy Watson's shoulder wound. Watson had caught shrapnel from a mortar round during yesterday's engagement, but he'd refused evacuation, knowing Charlie Team couldn't afford to lose another member. Zhang, a former emergency room nurse from San Francisco, had enlisted after her civilian hospital was mysteriously bombed during what authorities called a gas leak explosion. She'd seen the blast patterns and knew conventional explosives when she encountered them. Her decision to join the military had cost her a comfortable civilian life, but she couldn't stand by while her country was under attack from the shadows. "Watson's good to go," Zhang reported through her headset. "The wound's clean and he's maintaining full mobility." Watson, a tough kid from rural Alabama, had grown up hunting with his grandfather in the Appalachian Mountains. His knowledge of wilderness survival and ability to read terrain made him Charlie Team's primary scout. Despite the pain in his shoulder, Watson was already studying potential movement routes through the valley below. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "I can flank around Devil's Canyon and get behind their position," Watson suggested, pointing toward a narrow gorge that cut through the mountainside. "Give me 90 minutes and I can be in position to provide crossfire support." Staff Sergeant Robert Bull Henderson, Charlie Team's demolitions expert, shook his head from his position near a cluster of pine trees. At 34, Henderson was the oldest member of the team and carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd been in more firefights than the rest of them combined. His weathered face bore a scar from his first tour in Korea, where he'd earned his nickname by literally bulldozing through an enemy bunker with nothing but dynamite and determination. "Negative, Watson. That canyon's a death trap if they spot you. One sniper with good positioning and you're pinned with no escape route," Henderson said, his gravelly voice carrying the authority of experience. Henderson's personal stake in this war was different from the others. His wife Caroline and their 8-year-old daughter Emma lived in the small town of Pine Ridge, just 40 miles east of their current position. Intelligence reports suggested enemy infiltration teams were operating near civilian populations, using small communities as cover for their operations. Every day Henderson spent in the mountains was another day he worried about his family's safety. Specialist Jennifer Murphy, the team's communications and intelligence analyst, monitored multiple radio frequencies from her portable command station. Murphy, a former MIT graduate student who'd abandoned her doctoral program in electrical engineering to serve her country, was intercepting encrypted enemy transmissions and attempting to decode their tactical plans. "I'm picking up increased chatter on their primary frequency," Murphy reported, her fingers dancing across the radio controls. "They're coordinating something big. Multiple units are being repositioned, and they're expecting some kind of delivery at coordinates they're not transmitting in clear." Murphy's motivation for military service was purely intellectual curiosity combined with patriotic duty. She'd realized that the conflict brewing in the mountains represented a technological arms race, and she wanted to ensure America maintained its advantage. Her ability to break enemy codes and intercept communications had already saved dozens of American lives. Back at the forward command bunker, Lieutenant Colonel James Hartford studied tactical maps spread across a folding table. At 47, Hartford was a career military officer who'd served in World War II as a young lieutenant and had been fighting various classified conflicts for the past 15 years. His silver hair and deep-set eyes reflected the weight of countless decisions that had determined life and death for the soldiers under his command. Hartford's aide, Major Catherine Pierce, stood beside him reviewing intelligence reports that had arrived via encrypted transmission 30 minutes earlier. Pierce, a former CIA analyst who'd transferred to military intelligence, brought a different perspective to tactical planning. Her background in psychological operations and enemy behavior analysis made her invaluable in understanding their opponent's strategy. The pattern suggests they're not just trying to control territory, Pierce explained, tracing lines on the map with her finger. They're systematically targeting our best assets. First, they eliminate Alpha Team, then they position snipers to ambush our supply convoys. This isn't random harassment, it's surgical strike warfare designed to cripple our operational capacity. Hartford nodded grimly. What's their endgame? Complete isolation, Pierce replied. If they can cut off our forward operating bases and eliminate our most skilled personnel, they can hold this entire region without firing a shot at civilian populations. The government can't risk public panic by admitting foreign forces control American territory, so they'll negotiate from a position of weakness. Meanwhile, in the mobile medical unit positioned 3 miles behind the front lines, Dr. Elizabeth Ross prepared for what she knew would be a massive casualty event. Ross, a former trauma surgeon from Chicago, had volunteered for military service after losing her husband in what authorities had called a terrorist attack on a federal building. She'd seen enough classified intelligence to understand that the attack was actually part of a larger coordinated assault on American infrastructure. Ross's medical unit included nurse practitioner David Kim, a former Army medic who'd served 2 tours in Korea before attending nursing school on the GI Bill. Kim's experience with combat medicine under fire made him essential for treating wounded soldiers in hostile territory. "We've got enough blood supplies for maybe 30 casualties," Kim reported, checking their inventory of medical supplies. "After that, we're looking at field surgery with minimal resources." The stakes became even clearer when Hartford received an encrypted message from Washington. The text was brief but chilling. Operation Mountain Shield compromised. Enemy assets have penetrated Pentagon communications. Assume all standard protocols are known to hostile forces. Authorize whatever measures necessary to maintain territorial integrity. Sarah Mackenzie absorbed this information through her earpiece, understanding that the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. They were no longer fighting a conventional enemy following predictable tactics. They were facing opponents who knew American military doctrine as well as they did, possibly better. "Foster, what's the movement pattern of those compromised soldiers?" Foster tracked them through her binoculars. "They're maintaining standard patrol formation, but there's something off about their spacing. It's too perfect, like they're following a script rather than adapting to terrain." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Whatever had happened to Alpha Team, they weren't just captured or turned, they were being controlled. The enemy had developed some method of directing American soldiers like remote-controlled weapons, maintaining their tactical knowledge while eliminating their free will. This wasn't just about protecting a supply convoy anymore. If the enemy could control captured American soldiers, they could potentially turn entire units against their own forces. The war in the Colorado Mountains had just evolved from a territorial dispute into a battle for the minds and souls of America's fighting forces. Sarah checked her rifle one final time, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether she lived up to her nickname through skill and courage, or whether the one-shot wonder would become just another casualty in a war that was far more complex and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The first indication that something had gone catastrophically wrong came at 09:23 hours, when Specialist Murphy's radio equipment began picking up transmissions on frequencies that shouldn't have existed. The signals were coming from inside American military installations, but the encryption patterns were completely foreign. "Mackenzie, we've got a serious problem," Murphy's voice carried an edge of panic that Sarah had never heard before. "I'm intercepting communications from Fort Carson, Peterson Air Force Base, and NORAD, but the transmission signatures don't match any of our equipment." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Fort Carson housed the 10th Mountain Division, America's premier alpine warfare specialists. Peterson Air Force Base controlled air defense for the entire Colorado region, and NORAD was the nerve center of North American aerospace defense. If enemy forces had penetrated those installations, the implications were staggering. "Are you certain about those intercepts?" Lieutenant Colonel Hartford's voice crackled through the encrypted channel, though static interference was making communication increasingly difficult. "Affirmative, sir, but there's something else," Murphy continued, her fingers working frantically across her monitoring equipment. "The voices on these transmissions, some of them are speaking perfect American English with regional accents. Native speakers, not foreign agents using translation devices." The horrible truth began to crystallize. The enemy hadn't just infiltrated American military installations, they had somehow converted American personnel to their cause. Whether through coercion, mind control technology, or psychological manipulation, they had turned America's own soldiers into weapons against their homeland. The war in the Colorado mountains had just evolved from a territorial dispute into a battle for the minds and souls of America's fighting forces. Sarah checked her rifle one final time, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether she lived up to her nickname through skill and courage, or whether the one-shot wonder would become just another casualty in a war that was far more complex and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The first indication that something had gone catastrophically wrong came at 09:23 hours, when Specialist Murphy's radio equipment began picking up transmissions on frequencies that shouldn't have existed. The signals were coming from inside American military installations, but the encryption patterns were completely foreign. "Mackenzie, we've got a serious problem." Murphy's voice carried an edge of panic that Sarah had never heard before. "I'm intercepting communications from Fort Carson, Peterson Air Force Base, and NORAD, but the transmission signatures don't match any of our equipment." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Fort Carson housed the 10th Mountain Division, America's premier alpine warfare specialists. Peterson Air Force Base controlled air defense for the entire Colorado region, and NORAD was the nerve center of North American aerospace defense. If enemy forces had penetrated those installations, the implications were staggering. "Are you certain about those intercepts?" Lieutenant Colonel Hartford's voice crackled through the encrypted channel, though static interference was making communication increasingly difficult. "Affirmative, sir, but there's something else," Murphy continued, her fingers working frantically across her monitoring equipment. "The voices on these transmissions, some of them are speaking perfect American English with regional accents. Native speakers, not foreign agents using translation devices." The horrible truth began to crystallize. The enemy hadn't just infiltrated American military installations, they had somehow converted American personnel to their cause. Whether through coercion, mind control technology, or psychological manipulation. Private Watson, despite his wounded shoulder, had been conducting reconnaissance of the valley approaches when he spotted something that made his blood run cold. Through his field glasses, he observed a convoy of American military vehicles moving toward their position from the southeast. The vehicles bore correct military markings and appeared to be a standard resupply operation, but Watson's trained eye detected subtle inconsistencies. "Charlie team, this is Watson. I've got eyes on what appears to be a friendly supply convoy, but something's not right. Vehicle spacing is too precise, and I can see weapons modifications that aren't standard issue." Corporal Zhang, while maintaining her position as team medic, had been analyzing the psychological implications of what they were witnessing. Her background in emergency medicine had taught her to recognize signs of psychological trauma and behavioral modification. What she was seeing in the enemy's tactics suggested a level of sophisticated psychological warfare that went far beyond conventional military doctrine. "The enemy isn't just capturing our people," Jean reported during a brief tactical meeting. "They're reprogramming them. The movement patterns, the perfect formation discipline, the lack of individual initiative, these are all signs of behavioral conditioning." Staff Sergeant Henderson had discovered an even more disturbing development while conducting a security sweep of their perimeter. Hidden among the rocks and trees, he found recently installed surveillance equipment that hadn't been there 24 hours earlier. The devices were of advanced design, capable of monitoring not just visual and audio information, but also biometric data, including heart rates and stress levels. "They're not just watching us," Henderson reported grimly. "They're studying us, learning our individual behavioral patterns, our stress responses, our decision-making processes. This equipment could map our psychological profiles in real time." The tactical situation deteriorated further when Major Pierce intercepted a coded transmission that, once decoded, revealed the enemy's next phase of operations. The message was brief but terrifying. Phase 3 authorization confirmed, neural integration protocols tested and verified, prepare for mass conversion of the Rocky Mountain command structure. "What the hell is neural integration?" Hartford demanded when Pierce briefed him on the intercept. "Based on what we're seeing, sir, I believe they've developed technology that can alter human brain function," Pierce replied, her voice steady despite the implications. "Not just psychological manipulation, but actual neurological modification. They're turning our people into biological robots." Sarah processed this information while maintaining her overwatch position. The enemy snipers on Granite Ridge hadn't moved from their positions, suggesting they were either extremely disciplined or no longer capable of independent tactical thinking. The compromised Alpha team continued their mechanical patrol patterns, never deviating from predetermined routes despite changing environmental conditions. "Foster, I need you to observe something specific," Sarah instructed her spotter. "Watch the enemy positions for any signs of individual initiative. Look for soldiers adjusting their positions based on wind changes, shifting shadows, or other environmental factors." Foster conducted the requested observation for 15 minutes before reporting back. Negative on individual initiative. They're maintaining exact positions despite a wind shift that's affecting visibility and a cloud cover change that's altered their concealment. No competent sniper would ignore those factors. The implications were clear. They weren't fighting soldiers anymore. They were fighting weapons that happened to be housed in human bodies. Dr. Ross, monitoring radio traffic from the medical unit, made a connection that sent chills through the entire command structure. "I'm reviewing the medical files from border incidents over the past 6 months," she reported. "We have 17 cases of soldiers who went missing during patrol operations and were recovered days later with no memory of their absence. All 17 were debriefed and returned to duty." "Where are those 17 soldiers now?" Hartford asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Scattered across installations throughout the region, sir. Fort Carson, Peterson, Cheyenne Mountain, and several forward operating bases. They're in positions where they have access to critical infrastructure and command protocols." The enemy strategy was becoming horrifyingly clear. They hadn't just infiltrated American military installations, they had been systematically placing converted personnel in key positions for months, possibly years. The current engagement in the Colorado mountains wasn't an invasion, it was the activation of a network that was already in place. Specialist Murphy's equipment detected another alarming development. "I'm picking up activation signals being broadcast on multiple frequencies. The pattern suggests they're sending wake-up codes to sleeper agents positioned throughout the region." Sarah realized they were witnessing the opening moves of a coordinated assault that could potentially compromise the entire western United States defense network. The enemy had spent years infiltrating, studying, and converting American personnel. Now they were activating their network for a decisive strike. "Henderson, what's our explosive capability?" Sarah asked, beginning to formulate a desperate plan. "I've got enough C4 to level a city block, plus assorted grenades and shaped charges," Henderson replied. "But what are you thinking?" "If they can control our people through some kind of neural technology, there has to be a transmission source. Something powerful enough to coordinate multiple installations across hundreds of miles." "You're thinking about the radio tower complex on Mount Blackstone," Foster said, understanding Sarah's reasoning. The Mount Blackstone radio facility was a heavily fortified installation that officially handles routine military communications. But its position and power output capabilities would make it ideal for broadcasting neural control signals across the entire Rocky Mountain region. That facility is protected by at least a company of soldiers, Hartford pointed out, and, if our theory is correct, those soldiers might be under enemy control. Then we're not just fighting for a supply convoy anymore, Sarah replied, checking her rifle scope one final time. We're fighting to prevent the complete takeover of American military forces in the western United States. The countdown to the convoy's departure continued, but the mission had evolved far beyond protecting supplies. They now faced the possibility that within hours, every American military installation west of the Mississippi could be under enemy control, operated by converted American soldiers who retained their skills and knowledge but had lost their free will. Sarah Mackenzie, the one-shot wonder, was about to discover that her greatest challenge wouldn't be hitting distant targets with impossible precision. It would be finding a way to destroy the enemy's control network while avoiding harm to the American soldiers who had become unwilling weapons in their homeland's destruction. At 10:47 hours, the world changed forever with a single decoded transmission that Specialist Murphy intercepted from deep within Cheyenne Mountain. The message was brief, clinical, and delivered in the voice of General Patricia Holbrook, the commanding officer of NORAD. Except General Holbrook had been attending a classified briefing in Washington, D.C. for the past 3 days. All units, this is Mountain Command. Operation Mindbridge is now fully operational. American Continental Defense protocols have been successfully integrated. Initiating Phase 4, complete neural network synchronization across all military installations west of longitude 104.05. Murphy's hands trembled as she replayed the transmission. Mackenzie, that's impossible. General Holbrook is supposed to be in D.C., but the voice pattern analysis confirms it's really her speaking. Sarah felt the weight of realization crushing down on her. The enemy hadn't just infiltrated NORAD. They had somehow captured and converted the commanding officer of North American Aerospace Defense. If General Holbrook was under their control, she has access to nuclear launch codes, missile defense systems, and the ability to coordinate with every military installation across the continent. Foster, give me a range estimation to that fake convoy Watson spotted, Sarah ordered, her mind racing through tactical possibilities. Approximately 2.3 miles and closing. At current speed, they'll reach our position in 18 minutes, Foster replied, her voice tight with concentration. The timing was no coincidence. The enemy had orchestrated this entire engagement to coincide with the activation of their neural control network. While Charlie Team had been focused on protecting the supply convoy, they had been maneuvered into a position where they would witness and potentially be captured during the largest psychological warfare operation in human history. Lieutenant Colonel Hartford's voice cut through the radio static with an urgency Sarah had never heard from him before. All call signs, this is command. I've just received priority transmission from the Pentagon. Operation Blackout is authorized. Repeat, Operation Blackout is authorized. Sarah knew what Operation Blackout meant. It was the nuclear option for psychological warfare scenarios. All American military installations would be considered hostile until proven otherwise. Communication with higher command would be severed to prevent further infiltration. Local commanders were authorized to use any means necessary to prevent enemy control of critical infrastructure, including the destruction of American facilities if required. Sir, are you saying we're authorized to engage American installations? Henderson asked, his voice reflecting the moral complexity of the situation. Negative. I'm saying we're authorized to engage enemy-controlled installations that happen to be staffed by converted American personnel. Hartford clarified. The distinction is critical for mission parameters, but the tactical reality remains the same. Dr. Ross's voice joined the communication from the medical unit, carrying information that would fundamentally alter their understanding of the enemy's capabilities. Command, I've completed analysis of biometric data from our surveillance of the compromised Alpha team. The neural activity patterns I'm detecting suggest the conversion process isn't just psychological conditioning, it's actual biological modification of brain tissue. Explain, Hartford demanded. The enemy has developed nanotechnology that can physically alter neural pathways, Ross continued. Once introduced into the bloodstream, these microscopic devices migrate to the brain and establish direct control over cognitive function. The person retains all their memories, skills, and knowledge, but their decision-making processes are overwritten by external signals. Sarah absorbed this information while tracking the approaching convoy through her scope. The implications were staggering. The enemy could potentially convert any American citizen into a biological weapon simply by introducing their nanotechnology into the water supply, food distribution networks, or medical systems. "How long does the conversion process take?" Major Pierce asked, clearly thinking through the strategic implications. "Based on the behavioral patterns I'm observing, approximately 72 hours from initial exposure to complete neural integration." But here's the terrifying part. During those 72 hours, the subject appears completely normal. They return to duty, maintain relationships, and perform all routine functions while the nanobots systematically map and modify their neural networks. Watson, despite his shoulder wound, had managed to position himself for a closer observation of the approaching convoy. What he discovered made the situation exponentially worse. "Command, the convoy vehicles are loaded with what appears to be medical supplies, but I'm seeing specialized equipment that looks like intravenous infusion systems. They're not here for a firefight, they're here to convert us." The realization hit everyone simultaneously. This entire engagement had been designed as a capture operation. The enemy didn't want to eliminate Charlie Team, they wanted to convert them into weapons that could be used against other American forces. "They've been studying our psychological profiles, learning our behavioral patterns, understanding our decision-making processes," Zhang observed. Specialist Murphy made another disturbing discovery while monitoring enemy communications. "I'm detecting synchronized heartbeats across all the converted personnel in the area. They're not just receiving commands, they're operating as a collective consciousness. Individual personalities have been completely suppressed." Sarah understood they had reached the point of no return. Every minute they remained in their current position increased the risk of capture and conversion. But retreating would mean abandoning any chance of stopping the neural control network before it could spread beyond the Rocky Mountain region. "Henderson, how long would it take you to rig the Mount Blackstone radio facility for demolition?" "If I could get close enough, maybe 30 minutes to place shaped charges at the structural support points. But that facility is surrounded by 3 rings of defensive positions. And if our intelligence is correct, those positions are manned by converted American soldiers with full knowledge of our tactical capabilities." "What about a direct assault approach?" Watson suggested. "Hit them fast and hard before they can coordinate a response." "Negative," Pierce interjected. "If they're operating as a collective consciousness, they'll coordinate their response instantaneously. A direct assault would be suicide." Sarah studied the terrain around Mount Blackstone through her scope, calculating angles, distances, and lines of sight. Approaching undetected would be virtually impossible, especially against enemies who know American tactical doctrine as well as they did. "There's another option," Sarah said quietly, her mind working through a plan that would require her to push her marksmanship skills beyond anything she had ever attempted. Foster understood immediately. "You're talking about an extreme long-range shot, but the distance from here to Mount Blackstone is over 2 miles, with significant elevation changes and unpredictable wind patterns. The transmission equipment would be heavily shielded," Murphy pointed out. "Even if you could hit it at that range, a rifle round might not cause enough damage to disable the system." "Unless we use Henderson's explosives to create a custom penetrator round," Sarah replied. "A small shaped charge attached to a high-velocity projectile could punch through the shielding and detonate inside the transmission core." Hartford's voice cut through their tactical discussion with news that eliminated any remaining options. "All call signs, be advised. Satellite imagery confirms enemy forces are moving to surround your position. Estimated 40-plus hostiles approaching from multiple directions. Your window for extraction is closing rapidly." Sarah looked at her teammates, Foster with her steady nerves and mathematical precision, Zhang with her medical knowledge and determination, Watson, wounded but refusing to quit, Henderson with his demolitions expertise and family to protect, Murphy with her technical skills and patriotic duty. They had trained together, fought together, and now faced the possibility of being converted into weapons against their own country. They've been studying our psychological profiles, learning our behavioral patterns, understanding our decision-making processes, Zhang observed. Specialist Murphy made another disturbing discovery while monitoring enemy communications. I'm detecting synchronized heartbeats across all the converted personnel in the area. They're not just receiving commands, they're operating as a collective consciousness. Individual personalities have been completely suppressed. Sarah understood they had reached the point of no return. Every minute they remained in their current position increased the risk of capture and conversion. But retreating would mean abandoning any chance of stopping the neural control network before it could spread beyond the Rocky Mountain region. Henderson, how long would it take you to rig the Mount Blackstone radio facility for demolition? If I could get close enough, maybe 30 minutes to place shaped charges at the structural support points. But that facility is surrounded by 3 rings of defensive positions. And if our intelligence is correct, those positions are manned by converted American soldiers with full knowledge of our tactical capabilities. What about a direct assault approach? Watson suggested. Hit them fast and hard before they can coordinate a response. Negative, Pierce interjected. If they're operating as a collective consciousness, they'll coordinate their response instantaneously. A direct assault would be suicide. Sarah studied the terrain around Mount Blackstone through her scope, calculating angles, distances, and lines of sight. Approaching undetected would be virtually impossible, especially against enemies who know American tactical doctrine as well as they did. There's another option, Sarah said quietly, her mind working through a plan that would require her to push her marksmanship skills beyond anything she had ever attempted. Foster understood immediately. You're talking about an extreme long-range shot, but the distance from here to Mount Blackstone is over 2 miles, with significant elevation changes and unpredictable wind patterns. The transmission equipment would be heavily shielded, Murphy pointed out. Even if you could hit it at that range, a rifle round might not cause enough damage to disable the system. Unless we use Henderson's explosives to create a custom penetrator round, Sarah replied. A small shaped charge attached to a high-velocity projectile could punch through the shielding and detonate inside the transmission core. Hartford's voice cut through their tactical discussion with news that eliminated any remaining options. All call signs, be advised, satellite imagery confirms enemy forces are moving to surround your position. Estimated 40-plus hostiles approaching from multiple directions. Your window for extraction is closing rapidly. Sarah looked at her teammates. Foster, with her steady nerves and mathematical precision. Zhang, with her medical knowledge and determination. Watson, wounded but refusing to quit. Henderson, with his demolitions expertise and family to protect. Murphy, with her technical skills and patriotic duty. Team, we have one chance to stop this before it spreads beyond Colorado, Sarah announced. It's going to require everything we've learned, everything we've trained for, and a level of precision that may be beyond human capability. The fake convoy was now less than a mile away, carrying equipment designed to convert them into biological weapons. The neural control network was spreading across military installations throughout the western United States. And Sarah Mackenzie, the one-shot wonder, was about to attempt a shot that would either save American democracy or die in the effort. The weight of what they were about to attempt settled over Charlie Team like... Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the full weight of that revelation. The 127 people in that facility weren't just enemy combatants. They were victims of a technology so insidious that it destroyed the very essence of who they were while leaving their bodies functional. Private Watson, fighting through the pain in his wounded shoulder, had been monitoring the approaching enemy forces through his binoculars. What he observed challenged every assumption about the nature of warfare. Team, I'm watching the converted soldiers, and something's bothering me. When they think no one's observing them, I catch glimpses of something, like they're trying to fight the control. Foster adjusted her spotting scope to confirm Watson's observations. Through the magnified lens, she could see subtle facial expressions among the converted soldiers, micro-expressions that suggested internal struggle. A momentary twitch around the eyes, a slight tremor in the hands, brief hesitations in movement that seemed to indicate the original personality fighting against the neural control. "They're still in there," Foster whispered, her voice filled with horror and compassion. Part of their original selves is trapped inside, watching helplessly as their bodies are used against their will. Corporal Zhang, with her medical background, understood the implications better than anyone. If there's still some level of original consciousness remaining, then we're not just fighting enemy weapons, we're looking at the most sophisticated form of torture ever devised. These people are prisoners in their own bodies. Staff Sergeant Henderson had been working on the technical aspects of Sarah's proposed explosive round, but the moral complexity of their situation was weighing heavily on him. "My daughter Emma is 8 years old," he said quietly, his weathered hands working to attach a small shaped charge to a rifle bullet. "She asks me what I do in the army, and I tell her I protect people. But how do I explain that sometimes protecting people means—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. How could they justify destroying an entire facility filled with American personnel, even if those personnel were under enemy control? Major Pierce, monitoring communications from the command bunker, discovered another layer of moral complexity that made their decision even more difficult. "Team, I've identified some of the personnel at Mount Blackstone. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the communications officer, has a newborn daughter. Sergeant Michael Torres just got married last month. Lieutenant David Chen has parents who immigrated from China specifically because they believed in American freedom." Sarah felt each name like a physical blow. These weren't anonymous enemy soldiers. They were people with families, relationships, and personal stories. People who had sworn the same oath she had taken, to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. "There has to be another way," Watson said, his voice reflecting the inner struggle they all felt. "Maybe we could get close enough to disable the transmission equipment without harming the personnel." "I've run the tactical analysis 12 different ways," Specialist Murphy replied, her voice tight with frustration. "Every approach results in either mission failure or casualty rates exceeding 80%. The facility was designed to be impregnable, and the converted personnel know all our standard assault techniques." Lieutenant Colonel Hartford joined the conversation with intelligence that added another dimension to their moral dilemma. "Team, I've received confirmation from multiple sources. The neural control technology isn't limited to military applications. Intelligence reports suggest they've already begun testing it on civilian populations in isolated communities, small towns where disappearances wouldn't be immediately noticed." The implication was staggering. If they failed to stop the transmission network, the enemy wouldn't just control military installations. They could potentially convert entire civilian populations into biological weapons. Dr. Ross added another piece of information that further complicated their moral calculus. "I've been analyzing the progression of neural damage in converted subjects. The longer they remain under control, the more severe the neurological deterioration becomes. After approximately 2 weeks, the damage appears to be irreversible, even if the nanotechnology could be neutralized." "How long have the personnel at Mount Blackstone been converted?" Sarah asked, dreading the answer. "Based on behavioral analysis and intelligence reports, I estimate most of them have been under control for at least 10 days, Ross replied. "We may already be past the point where reversal is medically possible." Foster had been conducting her own moral inventory while calculating wind speeds and trajectories for Sarah's proposed shot. "My brother Danny died believing he was protecting American freedom," she said quietly. "If he could see what's happening now, Americans being used as weapons against other Americans, I think he'd understand what we have to do." Zhang found herself thinking about her time as an emergency room nurse, making life-and-death decisions under impossible circumstances. "In the ER, we sometimes had to make terrible choices: save one patient who might survive, or spend resources trying to save 3 patients who probably wouldn't make it. The mathematics of triage are brutal, but they're necessary." Henderson completed his work on the explosive round, holding the modified ammunition in his weathered hands. "This bullet represents everything I hate about war," he said slowly. "But if I don't finish this job, my daughter might grow up in a world where her mind isn't her own." Sarah took the modified round from Henderson, feeling its weight. Not just the physical mass, but the moral weight of what it represented. "Team, I need each of you to understand something. If I take this shot, I'm not just pulling the trigger. We're all pulling it together. This decision belongs to all of us. The people in that facility made the same commitment we did, Watson said, his voice gaining strength despite his wound. They swore to protect America from enemies foreign and domestic. If they could make the choice themselves, if their minds were still their own, what do you think they'd tell us to do? Murphy, who had been monitoring enemy communications, discovered one final piece of information that crystallized their moral dilemma. Team, I'm intercepting personal communications from some of the converted soldiers. Brief transmissions that seem to bypass the neural control. Fragments of their original personalities breaking through for seconds at a time. They're begging for help, not asking to be rescued, but asking to be stopped. The enemy forces were now less than half a mile away, their converted American soldiers moving with mechanical precision toward Charlie Team's position. Behind them, the mechanical precision of their movements was terrifying. 5 American soldiers who had become living weapons in service of an enemy they could no longer recognize. Foster looked through her scope one final time at Mount Blackstone, calculating the impossible shot that would either save American democracy or damn her soul. "Foster, final wind calculation," Sarah requested, her voice steady despite the moral storm raging inside her. "Wind speed 7 miles per hour, northeast to southwest. Temperature dropping, which will affect bullet trajectory. Distance 2.7 miles with 1,200-foot elevation differential," Foster replied, her mathematical precision providing a strange comfort in the face of moral chaos. Sarah Mackenzie, the one-shot wonder, prepared to attempt the most difficult shot in military history, not because of the technical challenges, but because the target was an American facility filled with American personnel who had become victims of the most sophisticated form of psychological warfare ever devised. The moral complexity of the shot made it far more difficult than any physical obstacle she had ever faced. At 11:34 hours, the world held its breath as Sarah Mackenzie chambered Henderson's modified explosive round into her rifle. The bullet, no larger than her thumb, carried the weight of American democracy in its specially crafted tip. Through her scope, Mount Blackstone's radio facility appeared impossibly distant, a target that would challenge the laws of physics and the limits of human precision. "Contact front, 300 yards, Watson reported, his voice cutting through the tension. The converted Alpha Team had emerged from the tree line, moving with eerie synchronization toward Charlie Team's position. Behind them, the mechanical precision of their movements was terrifying. 5 American soldiers who had become living weapons in service of an enemy they could no longer recognize. "I can see Sergeant Thompson," Foster whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "He's wearing the same lucky charm bracelet his wife gave him before deployment. He's still in there somewhere." Sarah forced herself to ignore the emotional weight of Foster's observation. Through her scope, she could see Thompson's face, blank, emotionless, but still recognizably the man who had taught her advanced camouflage techniques during training. Now he was leading a squad of converted soldiers whose only purpose was to capture and convert the remaining members of Charlie Team. "Henderson, I need covering fire to keep them at distance while I line up this shot," Sarah ordered, her breathing beginning to slow into the meditative rhythm she had learned from her father during hunting trips in Montana. Henderson's voice carried grim determination as he positioned his rifle. "Copy that. But Mackenzie, you need to know, I'm not just buying you time. If those conversion nanobots get into our systems, I'm not coming back as someone else's weapon." The implication was clear. Henderson was prepared to use his final grenade on Charlie Team's position rather than allow them to be captured and converted. It was a contingency plan none of them had discussed, but all of them understood. "Specialist Murphy, what's the status of enemy communications?" Sarah asked while making minute adjustments to her rifle's elevation settings. "The chatter has increased dramatically," Murphy reported, her equipment detecting transmissions across multiple frequencies. "They're coordinating something massive. I'm picking up activation codes being sent to installations as far east as Kansas and as far north as Montana. This isn't just about Colorado anymore." Dr. Ross's voice joined the communication network from the medical unit, carrying information that added urgency to Sarah's impossible shot. Team biometric analysis indicates the neural control network is preparing for exponential expansion. Current projections suggest they could convert the entire western United States military infrastructure within 72 hours. Sarah felt the mathematics of the shot calculating themselves in her mind. Distance, 2.7 miles. Elevation change, 1,200 feet. Downward angle. Wind speed, variable. Currently 7 miles per hour from the northeast, but shifting. Temperature, 23 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping, which would affect bullet trajectory. Barometric pressure, falling, indicating incoming weather that could alter atmospheric density. "Foster, I need real-time wind readings," Sarah requested, settling into her final firing position behind the fallen log that had served as her sniper's nest. Foster focused her spotting scope on the distant facility, looking for environmental indicators that would reveal wind patterns along the bullet's flight path. "I'm seeing snow devils at multiple points between here and the target. Wind is inconsistent, varying between 5 and 10 miles per hour, with occasional gusts up to 15. The technical challenges of the shot were staggering. At 2.7 miles, even a perfect shot would take nearly 4 seconds to reach the target, during which time wind, atmospheric pressure, temperature variations, and the Earth's rotation would all affect the bullet's trajectory. The explosive tip Henderson had crafted would need to strike within a 6-inch circle to penetrate the facility's shielding and reach the transmission core. "Contact, 200 yards, Watson reported. The converted Alpha team continued their mechanical advance, their movements so perfectly coordinated that they resembled a single organism rather than individual soldiers. Behind them, Sarah could see the approaching convoy with its medical conversion equipment. Corporal Zhang had positioned herself to provide medical support, but her nursing experience told her that traditional battlefield medicine would be useless against nanotechnology designed to alter brain function. "Team, if any of those conversion devices get close enough to deploy, we have maybe 30 seconds before the nanobots reach our bloodstream through airborne particles." Lieutenant Colonel Hartford's voice crackled through the encrypted channel one final time. "Mackenzie, satellite imagery confirms enemy forces have surrounded your position on 3 sides. Your extraction route to the south is compromised. This shot isn't just your only chance to complete the mission, it's your only chance to survive." Sarah absorbed this information while making her final calculations. Through her scope, she could see individual details of the Mount Blackstone facility: guard towers, communication arrays, and the central transmission dome that housed the neural control network. Somewhere inside that dome, 127 American servicemen and women were trapped in their own bodies, conscious enough to understand what was happening, but powerless to resist. "Henderson, initiate covering fire," Sarah ordered, her finger moving to the trigger guard. Henderson's rifle cracked repeatedly, forcing the converted Alpha team to seek cover behind trees and rocks. His shots were deliberately non-lethal, aimed to suppress rather than kill, but the converted soldiers showed no fear response. They continued advancing with mechanical determination despite bullets striking inches from their positions. "Murphy, can you jam their communication frequencies?" Sarah asked, her fingers dancing across radio controls. "But their system is adaptive. Every time I block one frequency, they switch to another. It's like fighting a computer that learns from each countermeasure." Foster provided the final wind reading Sarah needed. Wind has stabilized at 8 miles northeast to southwest, but there's a weather front moving in from the west. You have maybe 3 minutes before conditions become impossible. Sarah's breathing slowed to the point where her heartbeat became audible in her own ears. She had trained for this moment her entire life, though she had never imagined the target would be an American facility filled with American personnel. Through her scope, she centered the crosshairs on the transmission dome, calculating the precise point where Henderson's explosive round would need to strike. "Foster, confirm target acquisition," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Target confirmed. Transmission dome, center mass, 2.7 miles downrange." Sarah's finger moved to the trigger, applying the precise pressure her father had taught her during hunting trips. "For every American soldier who gave their life for freedom," she whispered. "For every civilian who will never know this war was fought. For the 127 people in that facility who deserve to be free, even if freedom means death." The converted Alpha team was now 100 yards away, close enough that Sarah could see the vacant expressions on their faces. Thompson raised his rifle, not to fire, but to deploy some kind of device that Sarah recognized as a nanobotic dispersal unit. "Contact, 200 yards, Watson reported, his own rifle trained on the approaching converted soldiers. Sarah felt time slow to a crawl as she applied final trigger pressure. The shot would either save American democracy or fail spectacularly, leaving Charlie Team to be captured and converted into weapons against their own country. Through her scope, the transmission dome seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, broadcasting the signals that had turned patriotic American soldiers into biological weapons. At 11:42 hours and 17 seconds, on a frozen mountainside in Colorado, Sarah Mackenzie, the one-shot wonder, fired the most important shot in American military history. The modified explosive round left her rifle at 2,800 feet per second, beginning a 4-second journey that would determine whether the United States of America would remain a free nation or become the first country conquered by its own converted military forces. 4 seconds stretched into eternity as Sarah's explosive round traced its arc through the Colorado sky. At 11:42 hours and 21 seconds, Henderson's modified bullet struck the transmission dome of Mount Blackstone with surgical precision, the shaped charge detonating exactly as designed. The explosion wasn't visible from Charlie Team's position, but the electromagnetic pulse that followed lit up Specialist Murphy's monitoring equipment like a Christmas tree.
"Direct hit!" Foster shouted, watching through her spotting scope as secondary explosions rippled through the facility. "The transmission dome is completely destroyed." The effect was instantaneous and haunting. Across the valley, the converted Alpha team suddenly stopped their mechanical advance. For a moment that seemed frozen in time, Sergeant Thompson's vacant expression flickered and his eyes showed a brief spark of recognition. He looked down at the nanobotic dispersal device in his hands as if seeing it for the first time, then at his approaching teammates with growing horror. "Sarah?" Thompson's voice carried across the 100 yards separating them, weak and confused, but unmistakably his own. What happened to us?" The conversion equipment in the approaching convoy began smoking and sparking as the electromagnetic pulse disabled their electronic systems. Without the controlling signals from Mount Blackstone, the nanobots throughout the region began to break down, their programming corrupted by the sudden severing of their command network. Dr. Ross's voice crackled through the radio with medical confirmation of what they were witnessing. Biometric readings from converted personnel show immediate neurological changes. The nanobotic control network is collapsing. Original personalities are reasserting dominance over modified neural pathways. But the victory came at a devastating cost. Through her scope, Sarah watched as explosions continued to cascade through the Mount Blackstone facility. The 127 American servicemen and women inside had been freed from their mental imprisonment, but the structural damage from the electromagnetic pulse and secondary explosions was catastrophic. "Murphy, are you detecting any survivors from the facility?" Lieutenant Colonel Hartford asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. "Negative, sir. The entire complex has lost power, communications, and life support systems. Internal temperature readings suggest catastrophic structural failure throughout all levels." Sarah felt the weight of 127 lives settling on her shoulders. Americans who had died so that millions of other Americans could remain free. She had saved her country by destroying some of its finest defenders, people who had been victims rather than enemies. Private Watson, despite his wounded shoulder, had moved forward to make contact with the recovering Alpha team. What he found there would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Team, Thompson and the others are coming back, but they remember everything. They remember being controlled, remember what they were forced to do, remember being trapped inside their own bodies." Corporal Maria Santos from Alpha Team was the first to fully regain her mental faculties. Her voice, when it came through Watson's radio, carried the psychological trauma of her ordeal. "We could see everything, hear everything, understand what was happening, but we couldn't control our own actions. We tried to fight it, tried to resist, but our bodies wouldn't obey us. The human cost of the enemy's psychological warfare became clear as more converted personnel throughout the region began recovering their mental autonomy. Dr. Ross received reports from medical facilities across Colorado of American soldiers arriving in various states of psychological collapse, all reporting similar experiences of conscious imprisonment within their own bodies. The nanobotic technology didn't just control their actions, Ross explained to the team. It created a form of psychological torture that may have permanent effects. These soldiers were forced to watch helplessly as their bodies were used to harm their fellow Americans. Specialist Murphy continued monitoring communications frequencies, documenting the collapse of the enemy's neurocontrol network. "I'm receiving surrender transmissions from installations across 7 states. Fort Carson, Peterson Air Force Base, Cheyenne Mountain, all reporting that converted personnel are regaining control and enemy infiltrators are being neutralized." But the victory was incomplete. Major Pierce's intelligence analysis revealed that the Mount Blackstone facility had been only one node in a larger network. "Team, we've identified similar installations in Montana, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico. Our action here prevented the exponential expansion, but enemy forces are still operating conversion facilities in those regions." Lieutenant Colonel Hartford coordinated with emergency command structures that were slowly coming back online as converted personnel regained their mental faculties. "Mackenzie, your shot didn't just save Colorado. By preventing the network expansion, you bought us time to locate and neutralize the remaining facilities. Operation Mountain Shield is being expanded into a continental-scale counteroffensive." The personal cost to Charlie team became apparent as they regrouped and began processing what they had experienced. Henderson discovered that his fears about his family had been justified. Pine Ridge had been infiltrated by enemy agents, and several townspeople had been subjected to early-stage conversion processes. Fortunately, the collapse of the network control network had occurred before the nanobots could complete their neuromodifications. Foster learned that her brother Danny had been killed while investigating one of the enemy's conversion facilities near the Canadian border. His training accident had actually been a deliberate assassination to prevent him from reporting what he had discovered. The truth provided closure, but also intensified her grief. Zhang received word that her former hospital in San Francisco had been targeted because she had been treating early conversion victims and was beginning to recognize the symptoms. Her decision to join the military had likely saved her life and prevented the enemy from eliminating a crucial witness to their operations. Watson's intelligence about terrain and enemy movement patterns proved essential for locating the remaining conversion facilities. His detailed reports helped coordinate strikes against installations in 4 other states, preventing the enemy from regrouping and re-establishing their neural control network. Murphy's technical expertise in enemy communications led to the development of countermeasures that could detect and neutralize nanobotic technology before it could establish neural control. Her work became the foundation for defensive systems that protected American military and civilian populations from future psychological warfare attacks. Sarah Mackenzie's impossible shot at Mount Blackstone became the defining moment that prevented the first technological conquest of American military by a foreign enemy. But the personal cost of her victory was a burden she would carry for the rest of her life. She had saved her country by killing 127 Americans who had been victims of the most sophisticated form of warfare ever devised. December 15, 1962, Final After-Action Report. Operation Mountain Shield concluded with the neutralization of 17 enemy conversion facilities across the western United States. Total American casualties included 847 military personnel who died while under enemy control and approximately 2,100 soldiers who survived the conversion process but required extensive psychological rehabilitation. The enemy's identity was never officially confirmed, though intelligence analysis suggested a coalition of foreign powers working with advanced technology that wouldn't be understood by American scientists for another 20 years. The nanobotic conversion devices recovered from the facilities revealed engineering capabilities that exceeded known technological limitations of any nation on Earth. Sarah Mackenzie was awarded the Medal of Honor in a classified ceremony, though the official citation listed her actions as extraordinary valor during mountain warfare operations. The true nature of her service remained classified for national security reasons. She retired from active duty 6 months later, haunted by nightmares of the 127 Americans who had died to preserve American freedom. The one-shot wonder had proven that individual courage and impossible precision could change the course of history. But she had also learned that victory in modern warfare came with moral complexities that traditional military training could never adequately prepare a soldier to face. The war in the Colorado Mountains remained classified for decades, known only as Exercise Mountain Eagle in official records. The families of those who died were told their loved ones had perished in training accidents, a lie that preserved national security but denied them the recognition they deserved as heroes who had saved American democracy from its most insidious threat. The immediate hours following the electromagnetic pulse revealed the true scope of the enemy's infiltration network. As converted personnel across the western United States began regaining their mental faculties, a horrifying picture emerged of how close America had come to complete subjugation. General Patricia Holbrook, upon recovering from her own conversion at NORAD, discovered that she had been preparing to authorize the launch of nuclear weapons against American cities under the pretext of eliminating terrorist strongholds. The nanobotic control was so sophisticated that I believed I was making rational command decisions, General Holbrook later testified in classified congressional hearings. Every action felt justified, every order seemed logical, but I was essentially a biological puppet executing
someone else's strategic plan. The psychological aftermath for recovered personnel proved as devastating as the physical casualties. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the communications officer at Mount Blackstone who had died in Sarah's strike, left behind a newborn daughter named Emma. Her husband, Staff Sergeant Robert Walsh, had been stationed at Fort Carson and had also been converted. Upon recovery, he faced the unbearable knowledge that his wife had died while under enemy control, unable to even remember their daughter's name during her final days. Dr. Elizabeth Ross established the first treatment protocols for what became known as neural conversion syndrome. Her research revealed that while the nanobots could be neutralized, the psychological trauma of being imprisoned within one's own body created lasting effects comparable to severe PTSD combined with dissociative identity disorder. Imagine being awake during surgery, feeling every cut but unable to scream, Dr. Ross explained in her classified medical report. Now imagine that surgery lasting for weeks, and instead of your body being operated on, it's your mind being systematically dismantled and rebuilt. That's what these soldiers experienced. The recovery process was complicated by the fact that converted personnel retained vivid memories of actions they had been forced to take against fellow Americans. Sergeant Marcus Thompson struggled with survivor's guilt, knowing that he had been prepared to kill Sarah and her team, people he considered family. His wife, Linda Thompson, found their marriage strained as Marcus withdrew into himself, unable to discuss his ordeal or accept comfort. "He keeps apologizing for things he didn't choose to do," Linda confided to military counselors. "But he can't forgive himself for not fighting harder against the control, even though the doctors tell him resistance was neurologically impossible." Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams from Bravo Team, who had been pinned down during the initial engagement, coordinated rescue operations for civilian populations in small towns where enemy agents had been conducting conversion experiments. What her teams discovered in places like Pine Ridge challenged every assumption about the enemy's long-term strategy. They weren't just targeting military personnel. We found evidence of systematic conversion attempts on teachers, local government officials, police officers, and medical professionals. They were building a complete shadow infrastructure to control American society from within. The town of Pine Ridge, where Henderson's family lived, had been selected as a test site for civilian conversion protocols. Henderson's 8-year-old daughter Emma had been scheduled for routine school vaccinations that would have introduced the nanobotic technology into her system. The collapse of the control network occurred just 12 hours before the scheduled injections. When I think about how close we came to losing Emma, not just her life, but her mind, her personality, everything that makes her who she is, Henderson confided to Sarah months later. "That shot you took didn't just save the country, it saved my little girl from becoming a weapon against her own family."
Foster's investigation into her brother Danny's death revealed a network of brave soldiers who had died trying to expose the conversion program before it could reach full operational status. Danny had been part of an informal group of military personnel who had noticed behavioral anomalies in returned soldiers and had begun documenting evidence of enemy infiltration. Danny and 6 other soldiers had been preparing to present their evidence to congressional oversight committees, Foster learned from declassified intelligence reports. Their training accidents were actually targeted assassinations designed to prevent exposure of the conversion program. The psychological impact on Sarah proved to be the most complex aspect of the aftermath. While she had saved millions of Americans from conversion, she struggled with the knowledge that 127 innocent people had died because of her actions. Her Medal of Honor ceremony, conducted in a windowless room at the Pentagon with only 5 people present, felt more like a funeral than a celebration. "The medal is beautiful," Sarah wrote in her private journal, "but it's also the heaviest thing I've ever carried. Every time I look at it, I see the faces of the people who died at Mount Blackstone. They were heroes who deserved better than becoming casualties of my impossible choice." Specialist Jennifer Murphy's analysis of captured enemy communications equipment led to the development of early warning systems that could detect nanobotic infiltration attempts. Her work became the foundation for a new branch of military intelligence focused on defending against psychological warfare technologies. The enemy's mistake was assuming that American military personnel would accept conversion passively, Murphy observed in her technical reports. They underestimated the strength of individual American identity and the bonds between soldiers who served together. The broader implications of Operation Mountain Shield extended far beyond the immediate military victory. Intelligence agencies realized that America's enemies had developed capabilities that transcended traditional warfare concepts. The enemy hadn't needed to defeat American military forces in conventional battle. They had simply planned to convert them into weapons against their own country. Major Catherine Pierce's psychological analysis of the enemy strategy revealed a chilling long-term plan. Phase 1 involved infiltrating key military installations and converting essential personnel. Phase 2 introduced nanobotic technology into civilian populations through medical systems, food supplies, and water treatment facilities. Phase 3 would have achieved complete control over American society within 18 months. If Mackenzie's shot had failed, Pierce continued, we estimate that within 2 years, the United States would have effectively ceased to exist as an independent nation, even though no foreign soldier would have set foot on American soil in a conventional invasion. The enemy's identity remained one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Cold War era. Recovered technology suggested a coalition of adversaries working with scientific capabilities that exceeded anything known to exist on Earth at the time. Some intelligence analysts speculated about extraterrestrial involvement, while others believed a breakthrough in quantum computing had enabled the development of nanobotic control systems. Dr. Ross's medical research led to the establishment of the Neural Security Protocol, a classified medical screening program designed to detect nanobotic infiltration before conversion could be completed. Her work saved countless lives, as similar psychological warfare attempts were detected and neutralized in subsequent years. Sarah Mackenzie's shot didn't just end one battle, Dr. Ross concluded in her final report on neural conversion syndrome. It established the precedent that American military personnel will never accept foreign control over their minds, regardless of the technological sophistication involved. The classified nature of Operation Mountain Shield meant that the families of those who died never learned the true circumstances of their loved ones' sacrifices. Gold Star mothers received telegrams informing them of training accidents, never knowing that their sons and daughters had died as heroes in the most sophisticated warfare operation ever conducted on American soil. 20 years later, when Sarah Mackenzie was teaching her young hunting students in the mountains of Montana, she would sometimes pause and look toward the Colorado peaks where Mount Blackstone stood. The radio facility had been rebuilt, but the 127 Americans who died there were commemorated only in classified records that would remain sealed for generations. The hardest part about being called the one-shot wonder, Sarah reflected in her final interview before her death in 2003, is knowing that the most important shot I ever took required the sacrifice of people who deserve to be remembered as heroes, not casualties. They died fighting a war that officially never happened, defending a freedom that most Americans never knew was threatened. Sarah Mackenzie returned to Montana, where she spent the rest of her life teaching marksmanship to young hunters, carrying the weight of 127 souls and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victories require the most terrible choices. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.